Buenas tardes. La última vez cuando estuve hablando era sobre... I have to speak English. Okay, the last time I was talking about the way the illusion of this syndrome of rewards and punishment, the illusion and addiction is part of it. And that can be done through language. Language is something which can limit the ability to really communicate. Instead of being used for communication, it can be just the opposite. I used economics as an example, where the GDP is not really telling reality to a great extent. For example, not telling about the loss in natural resources, which comes about through so-called progress, through economic growth, which I was saying is an addiction. So this illusion which happens is dependent on the way they measure GDP and other economic measurements. Gore was saying we need a whole new paradigm, and that is bigger than just economics. It's a paradigm for the system which is more spiritual. In other words, you don't measure, for example, what would be the worth of a human being. You don't measure it in how much work can we get out of that human being to earn money for us. That's what that human being is worth. We need a paradigm which is spiritual, which sees beyond that type of thinking, which is the paradigm that we very often have, which puts economic growth as number one. So this brings us to the linguistical aspects of this phenomenon. The illusion is carried on through centuries with the aid of expressions which hide rather than illuminate the reality involved. An example of this is military and war terminology. Peace through strength means lots of military preparation and or threats, etc., and euphemisms about the realities of war have been going on for centuries. This deception makes it difficult, if not impossible, for people to see reality. In Tolstoy's example, it was the Tsar. An example, he couldn't see reality. An example of a misleading expression in the area of, I'm just repeating what I already said. Okay, so that was what Gore had to say. He was talking about, I won't go all the way back to that now. Gore was talking about the basic need for a new paradigm, a spiritual paradigm. Gandhi, in his deliberations with the British leadership, also ran into a linguistic stumbling block. Luckily, he had an excellent grasp of the English language, but as he pointed out to the Prime Minister in a speech, he said, "And I am very grieved to have to say that up to now I have not been able to discover a common definition for the terms that we have been exchanging during all these weary weeks." So he was a pacifist. He didn't believe in war. And the leaders, of course, would believe probably in war. So that means he was so radical because he was completely outside the paradigm of their way of speaking. And so it actually would affect their communication, because they would actually mean different things, maybe with the same words. Later he pointed out that the important thing is really content and meaning regardless of words. So if you can somehow get through those different paradigms and get to the point, either through action or through content somehow, maybe communication could happen. Durkheim talks about the restraining nature of any system agreed upon by society, such as the symbols of language. If someone tries to go against them, he finds himself in trouble and finds extremely effective blocks built into the system against his efforts. An example of that is when they tried to change the expression for women that is Miss and Mrs., and the people trying to make equality for women, they said, well, men are just Mr. You don't have to say whether they're married or not. So why for women? So they tried to make Ms., M-S, period. Well, the society with its old traditional ways was too strong for them, and they never did come out with MS, except as a form of saying Miss, which they already had. So that's an example of how strong the language puts up resistance to people who are trying to resist certain problems within the culture. They can't even get a new word through. This would also seem to apply to those who, like Tolstoy, tried to call war mass murder. Society's agreed-upon system is very strong and counteracts such clarification. Other systems mentioned by Durkheim were those of money, credit, and profession. These are some of the systems involved in the rewards and punishment addictive process. And they resiliently resist reform. They make a comeback when they are resisted. In an article addressing the deeper systemic nature of the problem of drugs, Bill Wiley-Kellerman points out that ignorance is part of a technique convenient to the drug powers, who can remain hidden that way. So if they help keep people ignorant, that's to their advantage. And it's through language that they can do that. I mean, the language backs them up. But the uncovering of the linguistic expressions, the euphemisms, is a necessary part of the process of recovery from drugs. So if you start calling a spade, that helps for people to see reality, instead of using these euphemisms which are built into language, which continue these addictions, continues the illusion that the addictions depend on to exist. Tolstoy pointed out how many evil things are done in the name of love, especially killing, by political leadership or politically led groups. Maybe they say, we're doing this for love of our country. We're going to attack that other country because we love our country so much. Well, what about the other country? What about the women and children that you're killing? Oh, that's for love of our country. The common misnomer of the word peace, when the meaning is war, warlike, is something Martin Luther King explained about. There is a mix-up over means and ends. The end may be peace, but the means, the end is pre-existent in the means. The means have to be good as well as the end. If you say, oh, I want peace, that's why I'm going to kill my mother-in-law. Your end is good, but you don't want to kill your mother-in-law to get it, because that is not good. You have to have good in both the means and the end. So when they say, we want peace, that's very often the way they talk. When what they're really doing is having war, and that's just the opposite of peace. Someone who used peace as the motive of what he was doing was Adolf Hitler. Very often he used peace. King quoted Hitler as having said, "By means of shrewd lies, unremittingly repeated, it is possible to make people believe that heaven is hell, and hell heaven. The greater the lie," there was a little bit that I was taken out of that quote in between there. There were more words that I didn't say. "The greater the lie, the more readily it will be believed." That's what Hitler said. So language is a way of keeping hidden the real ideas and plans, which is the spirit, what's really going on in a spiritual sense, behind the scenes of the material world, where their results are acted out. So that plan is kept hidden through the lies in the language. If I understand Habermas correctly, he sees a change taking place in society from linguistic communication, in which consensus is an important part. In a group, they need to have, in groups, in community, we need to have consensus, to a new medium, money. In systems theory, this is explained as process in which decision-making happens. And with money, it's free of the necessities and constraints of consensus. So people don't really have to agree. Rather, a manipulative, in other words, based on rewards and punishments, interaction takes place and dominates the situation. So a couple of leaders could get together, make a deal. It might be good for them. The people might be, taken by the agreement, but you don't need to agree because money takes the place of it. You give your bribe, one gives a bribe to the other gives a bribe back, and everything's fine. And forget about the consensus of the people. Forget about the people, period. In the old-fashioned reality-oriented word, communication would be important for community members to understand about the outcome of what they are reaching consensus around. But the newer, more capital artificial medium based on money, decisions are made by the few who have enough money, and questions of consensus or the larger reality do not enter in. In this way, a division is created between those deciding things and the much more complex rest of the international society. And within this decision-making faction, there is a codependency, a mutual manipulation and addiction quality on the part of the parties involved. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.